There is a conversation happening in certain households right now that is not happening in yours. Not because you are not smart enough to have it, not because the information is secret or restricted or available only to people with a certain level of income, because nobody in your family had it either. And that gap between the financial conversations that happen inside wealthy households and the ones that do not happen anywhere else is the single most under-discussed reason why some families build wealth across generations and others start from zero with every new one. I am going to give you that conversation today. 10 unwritten rules, the ones wealthy families transmit not through books or lectures or school, but through dinner tables and car journeys and the quiet observation of how the adults in the house make decisions. By the end of this video, you will have received something that most people who grew up without money never received. And the rule that surprises people most is not the one about investing or debt or tax, it is number 7. Most people hear it and say they have never thought about money that way in their entire life. Her name is Sophie Hartley. She's 38 years old. She grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Leeds. Her father was an electrician. Her mother worked in NHS administration. They were not wealthy. They were not poor. They were careful. But there were no financial conversations in Sophie's house when she was growing up, not because her parents were irresponsible, because the conversations they would have needed to have were conversations nobody had ever had with them. Sophie has spent the last 8 years working as a private client advisor for a wealth management firm in London. She sits across from wealthy families every week. She hears the conversations. She sees what gets transmitted between parents and children that never appears in any personal finance book. She wrote 10 of them down for me, and this is what they say. Unwritten rule number 1. Money is a tool, not a score. In most households, money is measured by comparison. The salary is impressive relative to someone else's salary. The house is larger than the previous house. The car is newer than the neighbor's car. Money is a signal of status, of progress, of winning some competition whose rules were never fully articulated. Wealthy families teach their children that wealth does not start with money. It starts with ideas and the ability to create value. They teach children that money is a tool for solving problems and building something useful, not a number to display. In the household Sophie visits professionally, money is never discussed as a score. It is discussed as a resource with a purpose. The question asked about any significant amount of money is not how much is this, but what is this for? What problem does it solve? What does it enable? What is it being deployed toward? The child who grows up hearing money discussed as a tool develops a fundamentally different relationship with it than the child who grows up hearing it discussed as a comparison. One relationship produces stewardship, the other produces performance, and performance is expensive in ways that stewardship never is. Sophie tells me the first time a client's teenage daughter sat in on a family financial review and asked, "But what is that money actually for?" she knew the conversation had been happening in that house for years. Unwritten rule number 2. Debt has two completely different faces. Wealthy families teach children to distinguish between debt that builds and debt that costs. Studies on intergenerational wealth transfer show that families who maintain wealth across generations emphasize learning to distinguish between good debt, investments that appreciate or generate income, and bad debt, consumption that depreciates and generates nothing. In most households, debt is a single category, something to be avoided if possible and managed if unavoidable. The nuance, the debt used to acquire an asset that generates more than it costs, is structurally different from debt used to fund consumption, is never transmitted because nobody was ever taught to see the difference. The child who grows up in a wealthy household understands this distinction as clearly as they understand left from right. They know that a mortgage on a property generating rental income above its cost is a different instrument than a car loan on a depreciating vehicle. They know that borrowing to build a business with a documented return on capital is a different decision than borrowing to fund a lifestyle that exceeds current income. The lesson is not never borrow. It is borrow strategically for assets and never for things that only go down. Unwritten rule number 3. Tax planning is a primary discipline, not an afterthought. Here is where the gap between wealthy households and everyone else is most practically expensive. In most households, tax is something that happens to you. It arrives as a deduction from the payslip, as a bill in January, as a number calculated by an accountant who files the return and sends the invoice. Tax planning, structuring income, timing realizations, using available allowances before they disappear, is something most people never encounter as a proactive discipline. Wealthy families introduce tax planning concepts progressively as children mature. Teenagers learn the time value of money and debt management. Young adults receive exposure to tax planning and estate considerations. The education evolves because the application of each concept depends on having the previous one already in place. The child who grows up watching a parent make pension contributions before the tax year ends, who hears the word ISA before they're 12, who understands the timing of a sale can change the tax outcome by thousands of pounds, that child arrives at their first job already operating in a different financial universe than the child who has never heard any of this. Sophie tells me about a 16-year-old client's son who asked during a family review whether his birthday money could go into a junior ISA instead of a savings account. His parents hadn't told him to say this. He had absorbed it. We are 3 rules in, and every one of them is a conversation that happens naturally in certain households and does not happen at all in others. The rule that surprises people most is still coming. It is number 7. And when you hear it, I want you to think about whether anyone in your life ever said it to you. Unwritten rule number 4, your network is an asset that compounds. Long-term outcomes for wealthy families are influenced significantly by factors beyond portfolio returns, including family governance, communication across generations, and relationship networks. These are treated as deliberate wealth-building assets, not social byproducts. In most households, networking is a professional activity, something done at events, on LinkedIn, in the specific context of career advancement. Relationships are personal. The two categories rarely overlap, and nobody deliberately manages either one as a compounding asset. In wealthy households, the distinction does not exist. Relationships are understood as the infrastructure through which opportunities move. The introduction that does not exist cannot produce the partnership. The trust built over a decade cannot be replaced by a cold approach in an emergency. The person who has maintained genuine relationships across 20 years of a career has access to a deal flow, an information stream, and a support network that the person who has not cannot replicate at any price. This is not taught as manipulation, it is taught as care. Wealthy families teach their children to maintain relationships, to follow up, to remember, to show genuine interest, to offer value before requesting it, because they understand that the relationship is where the opportunity eventually lives. Sophie watched a client's 18-year-old daughter write a handwritten note to a family friend after a dinner conversation. She asked Sophie later, "Does everyone do that?" Sophie said no. The daughter looked surprised. Unwritten rule number 5, understand every financial product before you sign it. Unprepared inheritors often struggle with decisions about financial products and structures. Some liquidate valuable assets prematurely, incurring unnecessary tax burdens and missing out on long-term growth. Understanding the structures, what they do, what they cost, what they prevent, is the foundation of effective wealth stewardship. In most households, financial products are received rather than understood. The mortgage is taken at the rate the bank offers, the pension fund is the default option, the insurance product is the one the broker recommends. The terms are not read because reading them feels like an admission that you do not trust the professional who sold them to you. In wealthy households, no financial product is signed without being understood, not because the wealthy are suspicious, but because they have been taught that the product's true cost is always in the detail. The early repayment charge, the annual management fee buried in the key investor document, the clause that voids the insurance in the circumstances most likely to require it. The child who grows up watching a parent take a document home to read before signing it, who hears, "I need to have my advisor look at this," as a regular sentence rather than an unusual one, develops a default of deliberation that saves significant money across a lifetime. Unwritten rule number 6, live below whatever you earn. Always. Intergenerational wealth research shows that families who maintain wealth across generations consistently model financial discipline, keeping spending below income regardless of how income grows, treating the savings rate as the primary financial metric rather than the income level itself. This is the rule most people know intellectually and almost nobody practices consistently, because the mechanism that makes it difficult is the mechanism wealthy families specifically interrupt. In most households, income and lifestyle rise together. A pay rise is experienced as permission to expand. The better flat, the newer car, the more frequent restaurant. The lifestyle inflates to meet the income, and the savings rate stays flat or falls. Wealthy families transmit a different instinct. The pay rise is celebrated and then frozen. The increment goes somewhere deliberate before it can be absorbed by the lifestyle it might otherwise fund. Not forever, not as deprivation, but long enough for the saving to become habit before the spending becomes expectation. Sophie has sat with families where the children, as teenagers, already understood that their parents earned significantly more than the lifestyle suggested, not because they were told, because the conversation about the gap between what you earn and what you spend was so ordinary in their house that it had simply become part of how they understood the world. Unwritten rule number 7. Time is the asset. Money is just one way to protect it. This is the one. In most households, the relationship between time and money flows in one direction. You trade time for money. You go to work, you receive a salary. The time is spent, the money arrives. The more valuable your time, the more money you receive for spending it. Wealthy families teach the inverse. They teach their children that the goal of money is to buy time back, that the ultimate measure of financial success is not the size of the income, but the degree of control over the schedule, that the person who owns their Tuesday morning, who decides which problems get their attention, which meetings get declined, which opportunities get pursued, has achieved something that no salary figure alone can produce. Wealthy families increasingly focus on non-financial transfers between generations, time ownership, schedule autonomy, and the freedom to make decisions without income dependency. These are treated as primary wealth outcomes, not side effects of financial success. Sophie tells me that this is the rule that lands hardest with people who did not grow up wealthy, because from the outside, wealth looks like nice things. From the inside, it is Tuesday morning. It is the ability to take the phone call or decline it, to work on what matters or not work today, to give 3 hours to the thing that does not pay immediately because the financial structure underneath allows it. The child who grows up understanding that money is being built toward time, not toward things, makes every financial decision differently. Unwritten rule number 8. Understand the difference between net worth and income. Many inheritors and first-generation wealth builders focus heavily on income as the primary metric of financial progress, while neglecting net worth, the stock of accumulated assets minus liabilities, which is the number that actually determines long-term financial security and options. Most people can tell you their salary to the nearest £1,000. Almost nobody can tell you their net worth to the nearest 10,000 because almost nobody is tracking it. Wealthy families track net worth as the primary financial metric. It is the number reviewed at the annual family meeting. It is the number discussed with the advisor. It is the lens through which every major financial decision is evaluated. Not, can I afford the monthly payment, but what does this do to the net worth trajectory? The child who grows up hearing net worth discussed as the important number, rather than income, rather than what things cost, arrives at their first job already measuring the right thing, and measuring the right thing is most of the battle. Unwritten rule number 9. Give deliberately, not reactively. In most households, giving is reactive. The charity collection at work, the friend's fundraiser on social media, the cause that is in the news this week. Giving happens in response to requests rather than as an expression of considered values.
Wealthy families treat philanthropy and charitable giving as a deliberate wealth strategy with its own principles. Give to causes that align with family values, give in ways that are tax efficient, give at a scale and consistency that allows the recipient to plan, and involve younger generations in the giving decisions to transmit the values that underlie the wealth. The child who sits at the table when the family's annual charitable giving is discussed, who is asked which causes matter to them, who sees giving treated as a considered decision rather than an impulsive response, understands money as something that carries values, not just value. This transmission is not about the amount given, it is about the framework, the idea that money reflects priorities, that where it goes is a statement about what matters, that financial decisions are ultimately expressions of character. Unwritten rule number 10: prepare for the transfer before it arrives. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation and 90% by the third. The primary cause is not poor investment decisions or bad markets, it is the failure to prepare the next generation for the responsibilities that come with the assets. JP Morgan's Family Wealth Institute published research in January 2026 revealing that 7 out of 10 family members face significant difficulties discussing wealth with each other. The conversations that protect wealth across generations are the ones most families avoid having. In most households, the estate is a subject for later. The will is something that will be done eventually. The conversation about what happens to the assets, who manages them, what they are for, what the values behind them are, is a conversation that feels premature until it is too late to have it properly. Wealthy families start this conversation early, not to discuss who gets what, to transmit the understanding of what wealth is for, what decisions it enables, what responsibilities it carries. Baby boomers and the silent generation are expected to transfer approximately $84 trillion in assets to the next generation by 2045, the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in recorded history. The families that preserve that wealth will be the ones who transferred the understanding alongside the assets. The asset, without the understanding, produces the second generation loss. The understanding without the asset produces the first generation gain. The conversation is more valuable than the inheritance.
Sophie told me something at the end of our conversation that I keep coming back to. She said the families who maintain wealth across generations are not smarter than the families who do not. They are not more disciplined. They are not more financially sophisticated in any innate sense. They simply had the conversations earlier. And earlier means before the money existed, before the need was obvious, before the crisis made the conversation necessary. The financial education happened at the kitchen table when everything was fine, which is the only time it actually works. Wealth preservation often requires more than technical planning alone. Breakdowns occur not because legal documents were missing, but because the next generation was unprepared for the decisions those documents required them to make. You may not have grown up with those conversations, but you are having one now. And the most important thing you can do with what you have just heard is not apply it to yourself. It is start having it in whatever form fits your family, at whatever scale matches your situation, with the people who come after you. The unwritten rules stay unwritten only as long as nobody writes them down. If this video gave you one conversation you had never had before, this channel is worth your time. Every week we find something like this, a rule that moves between certain families for generations while never appearing anywhere else. If you want to know what the next one is, subscribe. It takes 2 seconds. We find these so you do not have to. There is a conversation happening in certain households right now. Now you know what it sounds like. The only question left is whether it starts in yours.